The flight was supposed to be routine, just another trip for Maya Brooks, a popular lifestyle influencer known for her motivational content and uplifting messages. Dressed in a sleek navy blazer, Maya settled into her business class seat with quiet confidence, ready to prepare for an upcoming event that could mark yet another achievement in her growing career. As the engines hummed steadily and the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee drifted through the cabin, Maya tapped away on her phone, crafting a quick update for her followers. Around her, the atmosphere was peaceful, with passengers adjusting their belongings and flight attendants gliding gracefully down the aisle, offering refreshments and warm smiles. But amid the calm, one crew member stood out. Linda Harper, a senior flight attendant whose tense posture and abrupt tone hinted at a simmering frustration beneath her professional exterior. No one seemed to notice, or perhaps they chose to ignore it. The first spark of conflict came when Maya pressed the call button to request a simple change to her drink. The iced tea she received was sweetened, but she had requested unsweetened. Linda arrived at her seat, flashing a tight, thin-lipped smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "What's the problem?" Linda asked sharply, her voice clipped and devoid of warmth. Maya, always polite, calmly explained the mix-up. "I believe this was supposed to be unsweetened. Would it be possible to switch it out?" Linda's expression hardened. "This is what you ordered," she replied curtly, sliding the blame onto Maya. Nearby passengers began to glance over, sensing the sudden change in atmosphere. But Maya maintained her composure, her voice level. "I'm sorry, but I don't think that's right. I'd appreciate if you could bring the correct drink." With a sharp intake of breath, Linda snatched the glass, muttering under her breath as she walked away. The words weren't loud, but they were unmistakable. A cutting remark that felt unnecessarily personal. Maya glanced briefly around the cabin. The tension was tangible, but for the sake of keeping the peace, she chose to let it slide. Moments later, Linda returned with the new drink, but her demeanor hadn't softened. She placed the glass down with more force than necessary, causing the liquid to slosh onto Maya's tray table. "Some people don't know how to fly," Linda muttered, just loud enough for Maya, and perhaps those sitting nearby to hear. The words stung. Maya had dealt with similar passive-aggressive remarks in the past, but it never made them easier to swallow. Despite her success and the respect she had earned, moments like these served as a reminder that prejudice lingered in unexpected places. Maya met Linda's gaze with calm intensity. "Excuse me, but that was uncalled for." Linda's face flushed. She mumbled something about stress and hurried away, but the cabin had already picked up on the underlying tension. Whispers spread, and passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Maya took a slow breath, willing herself to focus on the presentation she was preparing. Sometimes the best course of action was to let things pass. But as the flight continued, it became clear that this wasn't one of those times. Roughly 20 minutes later, as the plane climbed steadily, the cabin temperature began to dip. Maya reached for the call button once more, this time requesting a blanket. Linda approached again, her movements sharp, and her voice just a little louder than necessary. "What now?" she snapped, drawing the attention of several passengers. Maya remained unshaken. "I was hoping to get a blanket. It's gotten a bit cold." Linda's eyes narrowed, and she sighed theatrically. "We're out of blankets," she replied, her tone carrying a hint of mockery. Maya frowned slightly, glancing around. Just moments earlier, she had seen blankets being distributed to other passengers. "I noticed some being handed out a few rows ahead," Maya responded, her tone measured but firm. "If there's an issue, I'd appreciate some clarity." Linda's shoulders stiffened at Maya's words. Her cheeks flushed a shade darker, and in a move that took everyone by surprise, she leaned down, bringing her face closer to Maya's. "I don't know who you think you are," Linda hissed under her breath, her voice cold enough that the passengers seated nearby could hear. The air grew thick with silence. Maya felt the weight of the cabin's gaze pressing in on her, every pair of eyes fixed on the exchange. Whispers rippled subtly through the rows. Maya straightened in her seat, refusing to shrink under Linda's glare. "I'm someone who expects basic courtesy," she said calmly. "And I think you've forgotten that's part of your job." Linda's eyes flickered with something unreadable. Frustration, perhaps even embarrassment. before she abruptly pulled away and retreated down the aisle. Passengers continued to murmur quietly, some nodding subtly in Maya's direction as a quiet show of solidarity. As the plane cruised on, Maya's mind lingered on the confrontation. She had faced plenty of obstacles on her journey, but this felt different. Sometimes, a simple request isn't simple at all. And as Maya was about to discover, this was only the beginning. Voice echoed across the rows. Every passenger seemed to sit a little straighter, their discomfort turning into disbelief. Maya Brooks met Linda Harper's gaze without flinching. This wasn't the first time she had encountered veiled prejudice disguised as professionalism, but the blatant nature of Linda's words struck a different chord. "What exactly do you mean by people like this?" Maya asked, her tone sharp but steady. Linda's eyes darted across the cabin, but there was no lifeline to be found. Even the junior flight attendant standing a few feet away by the galley shifted awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with how the situation had unfolded. I didn't mean it like that," Linda stammered, though the confidence she once held was slipping fast. A man from the row ahead spoke up, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "I think we all heard exactly what you meant." Nods of agreement rippled through the cabin. Passengers exchanged glances, their initial hesitation giving way to collective solidarity. Linda's mouth opened, but whatever she had planned to say dissolved into silence. Maya took the opportunity to stand slowly, smoothing down her blazer as she faced Linda head-on. "I don't believe I'm asking for too much," Maya began, her voice loud enough to reach every corner of the business class section. "I paid for this seat like everyone else. I didn't demand luxury, just a blanket and a little respect." A murmur of approval followed her words, growing louder as the older woman from the back chimed in. "She's right. We've all seen how you've treated her. It's unacceptable." Linda's gaze flickered between Maya and the other passengers, her face flushed with frustration. Yet, she refused to back down. "You don't understand the stress we're under," Linda snapped, her tone rising with each word. "Entitled passengers think they can say or do whatever they want." The older woman's eyes narrowed. "This isn't about stress. We've all dealt with difficult situations, but that doesn't give you the right to treat someone this way." Maya took a step forward, keeping her gaze level. "I understand stress. I deal with it every day. But the difference between us is I don't let it dictate how I treat others." Linda's lips parted, but no response came. The weight of the situation was becoming unbearable for her, and it showed in the tremble of her hands as she clutched her notepad. Before she could respond, the intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. I understand there's been a disturbance in the business class cabin. A senior crew member will be arriving shortly to assist. We appreciate your patience." As the announcement ended, Linda's eyes flashed with alarm. She turned sharply, marching toward the galley in stiff, jerky strides, leaving the cabin buzzing with hushed conversations. Maya slowly lowered herself back into her seat, exhaling softly as the tension gradually deflated. She wasn't proud of the confrontation, but she knew it was necessary. A few moments later, the curtain separating business class from the front of the plane parted, and Evelyn Grant, the lead flight supervisor, stepped through. Her calm but authoritative presence immediately shifted the mood. Evelyn approached Maya's seat, her eyes flicking to Linda, who lingered near the galley, head bowed. "Ms. Brooks," Evelyn addressed Maya with a professional yet sympathetic tone. "I apologize for the situation you've experienced. I'd like to hear your side if you don't mind." Maya nodded. "I appreciate that." As Maya recounted the events in a calm, matter-of-fact tone, Evelyn's expression remained neutral, though her subtle frown deepened. "Thank you for sharing that," Evelyn said when Maya finished. "I assure you this will be addressed." Evelyn turned sharply to Linda. "Miss Harper, may I speak to you in the galley, please?" Linda's face paled as she followed Evelyn out of sight. The soft hum of conversation filled the cabin once more, but the energy had shifted. Passengers cast sympathetic glances at Maya, offering subtle nods of approval. A few minutes later, Evelyn returned alone. She approached Maya again, her voice lowered. "I wanted to let you know that Miss Harper has been relieved of her duties for the remainder of this flight," Evelyn explained. "On behalf of the airline, I sincerely apologize. We take incidents like this very seriously." Maya dipped her head in appreciation. Thank you. I just hope this leads to real change. Evelyn's gaze softened. I believe it will. As Evelyn stepped away, the older woman who had spoken up earlier leaned across the aisle with a small smile. You handled that well, she said quietly. Most people wouldn't have stayed as calm as you did. Maya smiled, though she felt the exhaustion beginning to set in. Sometimes, staying calm is the loudest way to respond. The remainder of the flight passed without incident. When the plane finally landed, Evelyn met Maya at the gate, assuring her once more that a full investigation would follow. As Maya walked through the terminal, she felt the weight of the experience settling over her, but she carried it with pride. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the quiet reminder that standing up, even at 30,000 feet, could bring the kind of change that no one saw coming. Maya Brooks tilted her head slightly, her calm exterior unwavering as the weight of Linda Harper's words rippled through the cabin. The phrase, "people like this," lingered heavily in the air, and Maya's gaze sharpened. What exactly do you mean by people like this? She asked, her voice low but sharp enough to slice through the tension. Linda faltered, the confidence she had clung to moments before visibly cracking. Her eyes darted nervously around the cabin, searching for support that wasn't there. I didn't mean it that way. You're twisting my words, Linda stammered, though the weak conviction behind her defense only fueled the growing discontent among the passengers. From behind Maya, a man leaned forward, his voice cutting through the brittle atmosphere. No one's twisting anything. You've been rude since the moment we boarded. This isn't about her, it's about you. Maya remained standing, her posture composed as murmurs of agreement spread around the cabin. The momentum shifted, tilting the scales firmly against Linda. The senior attendant's face turned crimson as the pressure mounted. More voices joined the chorus. She's right, the young woman across the aisle added, shaking her head. This isn't about stress. We all saw how you treated her. Linda's gaze swept desperately around the cabin, but not a single sympathetic face met hers. Even the junior flight attendant standing by the galley averted her eyes, clearly unwilling to defend her colleague. A collective silence hung thick in the air until Linda's voice broke it. You don't know what it's like, she muttered, almost to herself, but loud enough for the nearest rows to hear. Entitled passengers, day after day. You try dealing with that. Maya's eyes narrowed slightly. There it was, entitled. The word hung heavy, landing uncomfortably among the passengers. Maya didn't flinch. She remained seated, back straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. The tension seemed to coil around Linda, suffocating the last remnants of authority she had tried so hard to preserve. A young woman seated a few rows away raised her voice, clear and unwavering. She hasn't disrespected you at all. You're the one who's been hostile since the beginning. Nods of agreement rippled around the cabin, emboldened by the growing solidarity among the passengers. You've been out of line from the start, a man echoed. Maybe it's time you took a hard look at how you treat people. Linda's composure wavered visibly. Her flushed cheeks and tight grip on her notepad betrayed the storm of emotions beneath the surface. As her gaze flickered toward the galley, she caught the eye of her junior colleague. The younger attendant shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. In that moment, the curtain leading to the front of the plane parted, and Evelyn Grant, the senior flight supervisor, stepped through. Her crisp uniform and steady presence instantly commanded the attention of everyone in the cabin. Evelyn's eyes swept the room, taking in the scene, the tense expressions, Linda's defensive posture, and Maya's composed but silent strength. She didn't speak immediately, allowing the weight of her arrival to settle over the cabin. Maya observed her carefully, recognizing someone accustomed to diffusing delicate situations. Finally, Evelyn's gaze rested on Linda. Her voice was calm, but authoritative. Miss Harper, I've been informed there's been a disturbance. Would you care to explain? Linda hesitated, her hand tightening around the edge of her notepad. It's nothing, Linda replied hastily, attempting to wave off the incident. Just a misunderstanding. But her tone betrayed her, and the passengers weren't about to let it slide. It's not a misunderstanding, the older woman from earlier interjected, her voice firm and unwavering. We've all seen how she's been treating this young woman. It's unacceptable. More passengers nodded in agreement, murmurs of frustration weaving through the cabin like a low hum. Linda's eyes flicked sharply toward the woman, her temper flaring. "You don't understand the pressure we're under," Linda snapped. Evelyn's gaze hardened, and she raised a hand, her tone cutting through the growing noise. "That's enough." The cabin stilled. Evelyn turned her attention toward Maya, her tone softening. "Ma'am, I apologize for the inconvenience. Would you mind sharing your perspective on what happened?" Maya nodded gently, standing once more to face Evelyn. Her voice was calm, deliberate, and composed. "I requested a blanket," Maya began, meeting Evelyn's gaze steadily. "Miss Harper told me they were unavailable. I then saw other passengers receiving blankets, and when I asked about it, I was met with hostility." Maya's eyes flickered briefly toward Linda, who now stood rigid near the galley, visibly flustered. "There were comments that went beyond simple miscommunication," Maya continued, "and I think we all agree that respect should be the bare minimum." Evelyn's expression remained neutral, but her slight nod indicated she understood the gravity of the situation. "Thank you, Miss Brooks," Evelyn said sincerely. "I appreciate your patience. I'll handle this matter from here." She turned back to Linda. "Miss Harper, please step into the galley." Linda's lips pressed tightly together, as if she wanted to argue but thought better of it. Without another word, she retreated down the aisle, disappearing behind the curtain. As the cabin settled into a low hum of conversation, Maya eased back into her seat, exhaling softly. Passengers nearby cast her glances of quiet admiration, and the older woman gave her a warm, approving nod. Maya returned the gesture with a small smile. She hadn't asked for this confrontation, but if standing her ground helped shift even one person's perspective, then perhaps it had been worth it. Response. Maya Brooks remained calm, her eyes steady as she met the senior crew member's gaze. Slowly she stood, the quiet rustling of her blazer the only sound in the heavy stillness of the cabin. "It's simple," Maya said, her voice clear and unwavering. "I asked for basic courtesy, and instead I was met with hostility and disrespect." The words Miss Harper used and the tone she took were unacceptable. Her words hung in the air like the echo of a bell, sharp and resonant. The senior crew member, Evelyn Grant, gave a grave nod. "Thank you, Miss Brooks. Please take your seat while I handle this." Maya inclined her head politely and lowered herself back into her seat, folding her hands neatly in her lap. She had said what needed to be said, and now the weight of the next move belonged to Evelyn. Evelyn's attention shifted back to Linda Harper, whose defensive posture betrayed the storm brewing inside her. "Miss Harper," Evelyn began, her tone firm but controlled, "your behavior has caused significant disruption to this cabin. I need you to step into the galley immediately." Linda's mouth opened as if to protest, but the unwavering intensity in Evelyn's eyes silenced her. With reluctant, jerky movements, Linda turned on her heel and followed Evelyn toward the galley, her shoulders squared as though she were clinging to some last shred of authority. As the curtain closed behind them, the cabin buzzed with quiet murmurs. Passengers leaned toward one another, exchanging glances and hushed speculation. Some cast fleeting looks in Maya's direction, subtle nods of solidarity and approval, while others sat silently, absorbing the weight of the scene that had just unfolded. Maya leaned back against her seat, exhaling softly as the storm inside her slowly settled. Outwardly she was calm, but beneath the surface, emotions churned. A strange blend of relief, vindication, and something close to sadness. It hadn't needed to come to this. Respect could have prevented it all. Minutes passed before the curtain shifted. Evelyn emerged first, her expression composed but set with grim resolve. Behind her trailed Linda, her face pale, lips pressed into a thin, rigid line. As they stepped into the cabin, the murmuring quieted instantly, as if someone had pressed mute on the entire section. Evelyn took her place in the center aisle, addressing the passengers in a voice that carried throughout the cabin. Calm, but unwavering. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to apologize for the disruption you've experienced during this flight. The comfort and respect of our passengers are of the utmost importance to us, and I assure you, this matter is being addressed promptly." The senior crew member's eyes flickered toward Linda, who shifted uncomfortably beneath the scrutiny of dozens of pairs of eyes. Evelyn continued without pause, her voice cool and precise. "Miss Harper's conduct has been reviewed and deemed unprofessional. Effective immediately, she is relieved of her duties for the remainder of this flight. A ripple of quiet gasps moved through the rows. Linda's eyes widened, disbelief shadowing her features as she stumbled for words. "You can't be serious," Linda blurted out, her voice cracking with unrestrained desperation. "I've worked here for over a decade. You can't treat me like this." Evelyn remained unmoved. "I'm afraid this decision is final. Upon landing, Miss Harper will be escorted from the plane, and further action will be determined by the airline." The stern finality of Evelyn's words left no room for argument, but Linda wasn't ready to give up just yet. Her eyes darted across the cabin, scanning faces in search of someone, anyone, to come to her defense. But the expressions that met her were unsympathetic, ranging from mild indifference to open satisfaction. Maya watched silently, observing the unfolding scene without a flicker of emotion crossing her face. She had anticipated Linda facing consequences, but witnessing them so publicly stirred conflicting feelings. "This is ridiculous," Linda fumed, her voice rising with frustration. "I didn't do anything wrong. You're just siding with them because they're louder than me." A man seated a few rows away shook his head, muttering under his breath, "Unbelievable." Evelyn took a deliberate step closer to Linda, lowering her voice to a whisper but lacing it with unmistakable authority. "Miss Harper, I suggest you handle this with dignity. Any further outbursts will only worsen your situation." Linda's chest rose sharply, as if she might retort, but the futility of her position settled in like a heavy weight. Her shoulders slumped, and without another word, she retreated toward the galley, vanishing behind the curtain with stiff, reluctant steps. The cabin remained suspended in silence. Evelyn turned toward Maya, her expression softening into something more compassionate. "Ms. Brooks, on behalf of the airline, I extend my sincerest apologies. I assure you this incident does not reflect our values, and we are committed to addressing it thoroughly." Maya met Evelyn's gaze and nodded politely. Her voice was calm, though there was a quiet strength behind it. "Thank you. I appreciate how swiftly this was handled." Evelyn gave a small, respectful nod before moving toward the front of the plane, allowing the curtain to close behind her once again. Maya exhaled quietly and returned her gaze to the notebook resting in her lap. Around her, passengers began to stir from the weight of the encounter. Some nodded discreetly in her direction, offering small gestures of solidarity and support. As the hum of conversation returned, Maya felt the tension slowly unravel. She knew the matter wasn't over. There would likely be reports, reviews, and meetings once they landed. But for now, she allowed herself to feel the weight of this small victory. It wasn't just about her. It was about drawing a line in the sand, so others wouldn't have to endure the same. The hum of the engines filled the space once more. Maya Brooks allowed herself to relax slightly, feeling the weight of the confrontation slowly ease. Around her, passengers whispered in quiet clusters, occasionally casting glances toward the galley where Linda Harper had disappeared. Some nodded discreetly at Maya, silent acknowledgments of her grace under pressure. Maya's fingers lightly brushed over the worn cover of her notebook as she opened it again, her eyes scanning the half-finished notes she had abandoned earlier. This was never how she imagined the flight would unfold, but life rarely followed a script. Staying grounded in her principles had always been her compass, and tonight was no exception. For now, she would wait. The real conversation, the one that mattered, would begin once the plane landed. The soft hum of the engines seemed louder in the stillness that followed. Though the murmurs of the passengers eventually faded, the atmosphere remained charged. Every so often, Maya could feel someone's gaze flick toward her, a blend of curiosity and subtle admiration. She kept her focus on her notes, though a small part of her wondered if the calm would last. It rarely did. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a figure approaching, Emma Hayes, the junior flight attendant. The young woman hesitated near Maya's seat, clasping her hands nervously in front of her. "Ms. Brooks," Emma began softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to apologize for earlier. I wasn't sure how to step in." Maya looked up, her expression softening as she registered the anxiety in Emma's eyes. "You don't need to apologize," Maya said gently. "It wasn't your fault." Emma's shoulders relaxed slightly, though the unease in her eyes lingered. She glanced toward the galley, as if ensuring Linda wasn't within earshot. "There's something you should know," Emma said, lowering her voice further and leaning in slightly. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened with Miss Harper." Maya's brows lifted, curiosity sparking. "She's had complaints before," Emma continued, nervously twisting the edge of her uniform sleeve, "from both passengers and staff, but nothing ever seems to come of it. She's been with the airline for so long that, well, it's like they just let it slide." Maya absorbed the information in silence. The revelation didn't surprise her. People like Linda often carried themselves with impunity, shielded by tenure and the assumption that no one would challenge them. But the knowledge stirred something deeper in Maya, a sense of responsibility. If this was a pattern, how many others had been on the receiving end of Linda's hostility? How many stayed silent out of fear or frustration? "Thank you for telling me," Maya said after a moment, her tone even but resolute. "I hope this time it's handled differently." Emma nodded, relief flickering across her features. "I think it will be." She straightened and quietly retreated, though her nervous glances toward the galley didn't cease. Maya's thoughts lingered on their conversation as she turned the page in her notebook. This was no longer just about her. If Linda's behavior had gone unchecked for this long, the airline's culture had deeper cracks that needed attention. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft crackle of the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." The calm, authoritative voice filled the cabin. "We apologize again for the earlier disruption. We are making every effort to ensure the remainder of your flight is as comfortable as possible. Should you need anything, please don't hesitate to ask." The message was standard, but Maya detected a subtle shift in the captain's tone. An acknowledgement that the incident had not gone unnoticed by the higher-ups. Minutes later, the curtains separating the galley from the business-class cabin swept aside. This time, Evelyn Grant returned with a man in a sharply tailored suit walking alongside her. His composed expression and air of authority were unmistakable. Michael Lang, she presumed. Corporate. Maya felt the quiet hush settle over the cabin as his polished shoes clicked lightly against the floor. Passengers subtly straightened, sensing that someone important had entered the fray. As he reached Maya's row, the man offered a courteous nod. "Miss Brooks," he greeted, his tone professional but warm. "I'm Michael Lang with the airline's corporate team. We've been made aware of the situation, and I want to personally assure you that we are taking it very seriously." Maya met his gaze, her expression calm but unwavering. "I appreciate that, Mr. Lang," she replied, choosing her words carefully. "But I hope you understand this isn't just about me. It seems like this may be part of a larger pattern, and I'd like to know what steps will be taken to address it." Michael's eyes flickered briefly with surprise at her directness, but he recovered swiftly, offering a small nod. "You're absolutely right," he admitted, his voice shifting to one of measured respect. "This incident has highlighted issues that need to be addressed company-wide. I can assure you that a full review will be conducted, and corrective actions will follow." Maya inclined her head slightly, but she wasn't about to let the matter drop so easily. "I'll be following up," she said simply, her words carrying the weight of someone who expected results, not just promises. Michael's gaze held hers for a moment before he nodded again, this time with a hint of admiration. "I would expect nothing less," he replied. With that, he stepped back, returning toward the galley to continue his assessment of the situation. Maya returned to her notebook, but her focus remained sharp. She had set something in motion. Now, she just needed to make sure the momentum didn't fade once the wheels touched the ground. Maya Brooks allowed herself a quiet exhale as Michael Lang walked away. The gears of accountability were finally beginning to turn, but she knew this was only the start. Real change didn't come from promises made at 30,000 feet. It came from persistence. And if Maya was anything, she was persistent. The rest of the flight pressed on, but the shadow of the earlier confrontation lingered in the cabin. The hum of the engines was punctuated by the soft shuffle of passengers adjusting in their seats, their occasional whispers drifting through the air. Maya kept her focus on her notebook, but her mind was elsewhere, turning over the events that had unfolded and the long road that still lay ahead. The polite assurances from corporate were just the tip of the iceberg. Surface-level apologies wouldn't be enough. Real change would require pressure, transparency, and vigilance. Somewhere behind the curtain, Linda Harper remained out of sight. Occasionally, faint traces of her muffled voice drifted through the cabin, though Maya couldn't make out the words. It was clear the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. Passengers who had once seemed indifferent now cast her quiet glances of admiration. Some nodded discreetly, while others leaned toward one another, murmuring in hushed voices. Maya hadn't sought this kind of attention, but she knew what it meant. This wasn't just her fight anymore. Then, something unexpected happened. About 30 minutes before the flight was scheduled to land, the curtain of the galley shifted again. Linda emerged, her usual brisk confidence replaced by something far more subdued. Her face was pale, and she avoided eye contact as she moved stiffly down the aisle, her steps mechanical and heavy. Every eye in the cabin followed her, curiosity and anticipation buzzing like static. Linda stopped beside Maya's seat. The air seemed to thin, passengers leaning in ever so slightly as if not wanting to miss what would happen next. Maya set her notebook aside, turning slowly to meet Linda's gaze. Linda's hands clenched at her sides, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Miss Brooks," Linda began, her words stumbling awkwardly. I want to apologize for my behavior. It was unprofessional and uncalled for." Maya studied her carefully, the weight of the cabin pressing down as every passenger seemed to hold their breath. Linda's apology felt rehearsed. Forced, perhaps by Evelyn or someone higher up. It lacked the sincerity that could have softened the moment. Maya let the silence linger, deliberately considering her response. She could feel the unspoken expectations from those around her. They were waiting to see how she would respond. Finally, she offered a small nod. "Thank you," Maya said, her voice measured and calm. "I accept your apology, but I hope you understand, this isn't just about me. It's about ensuring no one else experiences what I did." Her words weren't angry, but they carried a quiet authority that seemed to diminish Linda further. Linda's lips pressed into a thin line, and she nodded stiffly. "I understand," she muttered, though her tone suggested otherwise. Without waiting for more, Linda turned and made her way back to the galley, her shoulders hunched beneath the weight of the moment. As she disappeared behind the curtain, a passenger across the aisle leaned over toward Maya, whispering with admiration. "That was incredible. I've never seen anyone handle something like that with so much grace." Maya offered a polite smile, but said nothing. The truth was, she didn't feel victorious. Linda's apology, if it could even be called that, felt hollow. A box checked under the watchful eye of corporate rather than a sincere acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Moments later, Michael Lang reappeared, his polished demeanor unshaken, though Maya caught a faint tension in his eyes as he approached her seat. "Miss Brooks," he said, lowering his voice to avoid drawing attention. "I wanted to inform you personally. Miss Harper will not be continuing with this flight after we land. She'll be meeting with our disciplinary board immediately." Maya nodded, her tone neutral but firm. "I appreciate the update," she replied, "but I'll still be following up to ensure this isn't swept under the rug." Michael's lips curved slightly into a faint smile. "I wouldn't expect anything less from you, Miss Brooks," he said, giving a slight nod. "We'll be in touch." As he walked back toward the front of the cabin, Maya leaned against her seat, the hum of the engines filling her ears once again. The end of the flight was near, but Maya knew the real work had only just begun. Around her, passengers began settling back into their routines. The tension that had gripped the cabin for so long slowly gave way to the familiar rustling of seatbelts and the shifting of trays. But for Maya, this wasn't a moment to relax. It was a moment to strategize. Change didn't happen by itself. It required action, and Maya was determined to ensure that this incident became the catalyst for something greater. As the captain announced their descent, the city lights below shimmered faintly, welcoming them back to the ground. Maya watched through the window, her reflection mirrored in the glass. The flight's landing would mark the beginning, not the end, of the conversation that needed to happen. Not just about Linda Harper's actions, but about the larger culture that allowed it. When the plane finally touched down, a faint ripple of relief swept through the cabin. Seatbelts clicked open, and overhead bins creaked as passengers retrieved their belongings. But unlike most flights, there was no hurried rush toward the exits. Everyone seemed to be waiting, watching, curious to see how this would end. Maya stayed seated, content to let the moment play out naturally. She had no intention of rushing. Change didn't happen overnight, but as she glanced at her notebook and the fading city lights, she knew she was ready to begin. Maya Brooks let the aisle clear, watching as Michael Lang spoke quietly with Evelyn Grant near the front of the plane. Their expressions were serious, their words brisk and deliberate. Linda Harper was nowhere in sight. Maya assumed she had already been escorted away to face whatever disciplinary measures awaited her. As the last few passengers gathered their belongings, Michael approached Maya once more. His professional demeanor held firm, but there was an undercurrent of sincerity in his eyes. "Ms. Brooks," he said, lowering his voice, "security and corporate representatives are waiting just outside to speak with you. We've taken immediate steps to ensure your concerns are addressed." Maya nodded as she gathered her things with deliberate care. "I appreciate that," she replied, her tone neutral. "But I hope you realize this isn't just about me. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to someone else." Michael's expression tightened slightly and he nodded. "I couldn't agree more. I assure you, we're committed to making meaningful changes." Maya slung her bag over her shoulder, her eyes steady. "We'll see," she said calmly, but the quiet edge in her voice left no room for doubt. As she made her way down the aisle, passengers she passed offered nods and murmured soft thanks. "Good for you," one whispered. Another older man gave a subtle thumbs up. Maya returned their gestures with polite smiles, but didn't linger. Her focus remained forward, her stride steady. The moment she stepped off the plane, a small group of people in sleek suits stood near the gate. Among them, a tall woman in a tailored blazer stepped forward, extending her hand. "Miss Brooks," she said, her voice measured but warm. "I'm Rebecca Hayes, regional manager for the airline. I want to personally apologize for your experience. We take incidents like this extremely seriously." Maya shook her hand, her expression unreadable. "Thank you," Maya replied. "But apologies are only the beginning. I hope you're ready to follow through with action." Rebecca's gaze didn't waver. "We are," she responded firmly. "We'd like to invite you to meet with our leadership team to discuss what happened and how we can improve moving forward." Maya considered the offer, her mind already calculating the implications. "I'll meet with your team," she said after a pause. "But I want to be clear, I'll also be sharing my experience publicly. People deserve to know how this is being addressed." A brief flicker crossed Rebecca's face, but she recovered swiftly. "Of course, transparency is important to us," Rebecca said smoothly. "We welcome your feedback." Maya offered a small nod and stepped past the group, her head held high as she made her way through the terminal. The usual hum of travelers filled the space, oblivious to the quiet storm that had passed just moments before. But Maya knew the ripples of this incident wouldn't stop here. As she approached baggage claim, her phone vibrated continuously in her hand. A quick glance revealed an influx of messages, followers, reporters, and friends, all eager for details. Maya paused, taking a slow breath before typing out a brief post. "What happened today wasn't just about me. It's about ensuring no one else faces the same. Accountability is the first step. Change is the goal. More to come." She hit post and felt the familiar spark of determination ignite within her. This was no longer just a flight gone wrong. It was the start of something much bigger, something she was ready to take on. By the time she reached the carousel, her phone buzzed relentlessly. Notifications flooded in faster than she could process. Her followers responded with messages of encouragement and solidarity. Words like inspiring, powerful, and courageous appeared repeatedly in the comments. But what struck Maya most were the stories. Strangers from all over the world began sharing their own experiences, moments of being mistreated, dismissed, or silenced. Many described situations where they felt powerless to speak up. It wasn't just Maya's followers who took notice. News outlets had already begun picking up the story. "Influencer confronts disrespect at 30,000 feet, airline responds," one headline read. Another was more direct. "Disrespect in the skies, airline faces backlash after incident with rising star Maya Brooks." Maya skimmed the growing number of articles, feeling a familiar mix of disbelief and resolve. The story was gaining momentum. and she needed to stay ready. As her bag finally appeared, she grabbed it and began making her way toward the exit. Before she could leave, a young woman approached hesitantly. "Excuse me," the woman said softly, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Her voice trembled slightly. "Are you Maya Brooks?" Maya turned to face her, offering a gentle smile. "Yes, I am. Can I help you?" The woman fidgeted with her phone, her nervous energy palpable. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said quickly. "What you did, standing up to her like that, it really meant a lot. I've been in similar situations, but I never had the courage to speak up." Maya's smile softened further. "Thank you for saying that," Maya replied gently. "But it's not just about courage. It's about knowing that your voice matters. Don't let anyone make you feel like it doesn't." The young woman's eyes glistened as she nodded, her voice quiet. "You're right. Thank you, really." She stepped back, clearly overwhelmed. Maya nodded in understanding, watching her disappear into the crowd. As Maya continued toward the exit, her phone buzzed once more. A flood of notifications awaited her. But this time, she welcomed it. The fight was just beginning. And Maya Brooks was ready. As Maya Brooks watched the young woman disappear into the crowd, she felt a quiet satisfaction settle over her. Moments later, her suitcase appeared on the carousel. She grabbed it, her mind already racing with the next steps. The airline had promised action, but Maya knew better than to rely solely on corporate assurances. If real change was going to happen, she needed to stay vigilant, and that meant using her platform to its fullest potential. As she exited the terminal, a familiar figure stood waiting near the entrance. Ethan Reyes, her public relations manager, approached with his phone in hand, his expression a mixture of concern and determination. "Maya," Ethan called, stepping toward her. "I've been getting calls all afternoon. Media outlets are asking for interviews. There's a lot of interest in this." Maya nodded, her gaze unwavering. "Good. Let them talk. The more people know, the better." Ethan frowned slightly. "I just want to make sure you're ready. This could get messy. The airline might try to spin it." "They can try," Maya replied firmly, "but they won't win. Not this time." As they walked toward the car, Ethan filled her in on the latest updates. "The airline released a statement," he said. "They apologized for the incident and promised a full review of staff training and policies. It's a good start. But it's not enough," Maya interrupted, shaking her head. "Words are easy. Action is harder." By the time she arrived at her hotel, her post had gone viral. Celebrities, activists, and fellow travelers amplified her message, demanding accountability. Maya scrolled through the outpouring of comments and retweets, with each story shared by her followers, stories of mistreatment and frustration. Her resolve only strengthened. Settling into her hotel room, she opened her laptop and began drafting a longer statement. This wasn't just about her flight. It was about a system that had allowed individuals like Linda Harper to operate unchecked. It was about protecting the dignity of every passenger moving forward. Her phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. "Ethan, they want a live interview tonight. Are you ready?" Maya stared at the screen for a moment before replying. "Maya, yes, let's do it." The fight was just beginning, and Maya was ready. That evening, Maya sat in front of a glowing screen, preparing for a live interview with one of the country's leading news networks. Her hotel room buzzed with quiet activity as Ethan coordinated with producers over the phone. A professional lighting setup cast a soft warmth across the makeshift studio, while a technician adjusted the mic clipped to Maya's lapel. Despite the flurry of preparation, Maya remained composed. She sat upright, her mind laser-focused on the message she wanted to deliver. This wasn't just about recounting what had happened, it was about shining a light on the broader issue and demanding accountability. "Ready?" Ethan asked, giving her a thumbs up as the countdown appeared on the producer's screen. Maya nodded, exhaling slowly. Seconds later, the anchor's voice filled the room. Joining us tonight is Maya Brooks, a prominent influencer and entrepreneur who found herself at the center of a widely discussed incident during a recent flight. "Maya, thank you for being here." Maya smiled politely at the camera. "Thank you for having me." The anchor wasted no time. "Maya, your story has resonated with people across the globe. Can you walk us through what happened and why you feel it struck such a chord?" Maya recounted the events with calm precision. She described Linda Harper's actions, the responses from fellow passengers, and the airline's reaction. She spoke not with anger, but with purpose, her tone measured yet powerful. This wasn't just about me, Maya emphasized. This was about the systemic issues that allowed disrespect and entitlement to thrive unchecked. People like Linda Harper feel emboldened because there's rarely accountability. The anchor's expression grew serious. Since the incident, the airline has released a public apology and promised to review its policies. Do you feel that's enough? Maya's eyes didn't waver. Words are a start, she replied, her voice firm. But they're meaningless without action. This isn't just about one employee. It's about a culture that tolerates this behavior. Until we see concrete steps, mandatory training, stricter oversight, and real consequences, this cycle will continue. The anchor leaned in slightly. You've mentioned plans to follow up with the airline directly. What does that involve? Maya met his gaze through the screen. I've already spoken with their corporate team, and I'll be meeting with leadership soon, she explained. But I'm also using my platform to hold them accountable publicly. Transparency is key. People need to see that promises are kept, not just for me, but for every passenger. The anchor nodded, visibly impressed. It's clear you're determined to see this through. What message do you have for others who might find themselves in similar situations? Maya's expression softened slightly, though her voice carried the same quiet strength. To anyone who's ever been made to feel small, remember that your voice matters, she said. Standing up isn't always easy, but it's necessary. Change doesn't happen in silence. It happens when we refuse to let things slide. The anchor smiled. Maya Brooks, thank you for sharing your experience and for your courage. We'll be following your story closely. As the interview wrapped, the room fell silent once more. Ethan clapped lightly, grinning. That was perfect. Exactly what needed to be said. Maya smiled faintly but remained grounded. The interview was just one step. The real work, the fight for real accountability, was still ahead. As Ethan fielded more calls from reporters, Maya's phone buzzed with messages from followers thanking her for speaking out. Each new story from a stranger, each shared experience of unfairness, fueled her fire. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all of them. Maya Brooks took a moment, letting the weight of the anchor's question settle. Her voice softened, but retained the quiet strength that had carried her through the entire ordeal. To anyone who's ever been mistreated or made to feel small, Maya began, know this, your voice matters. Don't let anyone silence you. Standing up isn't always easy, but it's necessary. Change doesn't happen when we stay silent. It happens when we demand better. The anchor gave a small nod, visibly moved by her words. Maya Brooks, thank you for your courage and for sharing your story. We'll be watching closely to see how this develops. The interview ended, and the room returned to stillness as the broadcast cut to commercial. Across the room, Ethan Rise clapped his hands lightly, a proud grin spreading across his face. You nailed it, Ethan said, stepping closer. That was exactly what needed to be said. Maya allowed herself a brief smile, though her mind was already racing ahead. This interview was just one step. The real challenge, ensuring the airline followed through on its promises, was still ahead. As Ethan began fielding follow-up calls from reporters, Maya glanced down at her phone. Messages poured in, many from her followers thanking her for speaking up. Others shared personal stories of mistreatment, each one adding fuel to the fire that had ignited within her. This wasn't just about her flight anymore. It was about reshaping a narrative for everyone who had been silenced or dismissed. Maya wasn't about to stop until real change became reality. Later that evening, Maya sat alone in her hotel room, staring at the endless flood of notifications lighting up her phone. Each message from strangers was a reminder that her experience wasn't isolated. One message stood out. A woman named Aisha wrote about being humiliated on a flight years ago, wrongly accused of sneaking into business class. She explained how she had stayed silent, too afraid of being removed from the plane. Thank you for being a voice for people like me. Aisha's message ended. Maya felt a lump rise in her throat. She knew that fear deeply. It wasn't the first time she had felt like an outsider in places where she had every right to be. The weight of constantly proving herself over and over again was exhausting. But this time was different. This time she would fight back, not just for herself, but for all the Aishas of the world who never had the chance to speak up. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Ethan stepped in, phone pressed to his ear. "That was a producer from another network," he said, lowering the phone for a moment. "They want to book you for another segment tomorrow. This thing is already trending as a national conversation." He paused, studying Maya's expression. "Are you sure you're ready for this? It's only going to get bigger." Maya looked up from her phone, her gaze steady. "I have to be ready," she said quietly. "This isn't just about me anymore." Ethan nodded, visibly impressed by her resolve. "Okay then, I'll keep the momentum going," he replied, dialing back into his call. "I'll confirm the interview." Before he left, Ethan added, "You should know, there's been some pushback. A few influencers are calling it exaggerated, maybe even a stunt." Maya's jaw tightened slightly, though she kept her voice calm. "Of course they are. When you challenge the status quo, people try to discredit you. That's not going to stop me." Ethan chuckled under his breath. "I figured you'd say that. I'll handle the noise." As Ethan left the room, Maya leaned back in her chair, letting her thoughts wander. Her mind drifted to the flight, the tense stares, the unspoken weight in the air, and Linda Harper's cutting words, laced with entitlement. It wasn't just the disrespect that lingered, it was the message beneath it. The quiet assertion that people like Maya didn't belong in spaces like business class. She picked up her phone and began typing a new post, addressing the growing wave of skepticism head-on. "For anyone questioning my experience, let me be clear. This isn't just my story. It's the story of every person who's been made to feel like they don't belong." The incident wasn't about the slap. It was about the disrespect, the entitlement, and the belief that someone's worth can be measured by their appearance or status. If this makes you uncomfortable, good. Change starts with discomfort. Satisfied, she posted it and set her phone down. Let them question her. The public could say what they wanted, but Maya knew the truth. As the likes, comments, and shares began flooding in, she felt her resolve deepen. The next morning, Maya awoke to an email from Rebecca Hayes, the regional manager she had met at the airport. The subject line read, "Action Plan Proposal, Airline Training and Accountability." Maya opened the email immediately, scanning through the detailed document. The airline proposed mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff, improved processes for handling passenger complaints, and a transparent accountability system to ensure employee misconduct wouldn't be swept under the rug. Toward the end of the email, Rebecca extended an invitation for Maya to help shape the training program as a consultant, highlighting that the airline valued her insight and perspective. Maya's lips curved slightly. It was a start, not perfect, but a step in the right direction. She replied, agreeing to review the proposal, but made her stance clear. "I'm willing to work with you on this, but I need to be assured this is more than just a gesture. It has to be a commitment to real, lasting change." After hitting send, Maya's phone buzzed with yet another notification. An activist had shared her post, praising her for standing firm and urging other airlines to follow suit. The ripple effect was undeniable now. This wasn't just about one flight, it was evolving into a much larger conversation about accountability and respect across the entire airline industry. As Ethan re-entered the room, Maya closed her laptop and met his gaze. "What's next?" he asked, grinning. Maya smiled back. "Everything." Maya Brooks scanned the proposal on her phone, her eyes narrowing as she processed the details. The airline's leadership had laid out a plan: mandatory diversity and inclusion training, stricter processes for handling passenger complaints, and a clear accountability structure for employee misconduct. They also extended an invitation for Maya to serve as a consultant, helping shape the program. Her lips curved into a faint smile. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, a step in the right direction. Maya tapped out a reply, agreeing to review the proposal in more depth. But she made her stance clear. This needs to be more than a gesture. It must be a commitment to real change. She hit send, and almost immediately, her phone buzzed with a new notification. A prominent activist had shared her story, commending her for standing firm and urging the airline industry as a whole to address deeper systemic issues. The ripple effect was undeniable. What had started as a single flight incident was evolving into a larger movement about respect, accountability, and systemic reform. Later that day, Ethan Reyes joined Maya in the hotel's conference room, his phone buzzing with emails. "The airline's leadership team wants to set up a formal meeting," he said, scrolling through his inbox. "Looks like they're feeling the pressure. They're offering a public forum where you can discuss your experience and propose solutions." Maya raised an eyebrow. "A public forum? That's bold. Are they serious?" Ethan shrugged. "I think they're realizing this isn't going away. If they're smart, they'll let you lead the conversation." Maya leaned back in her chair, considering it. The idea of sitting across from the same organization that had enabled Linda Harper's behavior filled her with both resolve and unease. But she knew this was an opportunity she couldn't let pass. "Set it up," Maya said, nodding. "If they want to listen, I'll make sure they hear exactly what needs to be said." As Ethan made arrangements, Maya gazed out the window at the bustling city below. The battle was far from over, but for the first time she felt the tide beginning to turn. Change wasn't just possible, it was inevitable, and Maya was ready to see it through. In the days following the incident, Maya's story spread to corners of the internet she hadn't anticipated. Her posts, interviews, and the conversations they sparked appeared on major news outlets, podcasts, and social media platforms. Messages poured in, each one adding more weight to the growing call for accountability. But as the spotlight intensified, so did the backlash. Detractors accused Maya of overreacting, twisting events, or seeking attention. Some questioned why a rude flight attendant warranted such a response. Others claimed she was unfairly targeting the airline. Maya read these comments with a calm exterior, but inside, frustration simmered. This wasn't just about a drink order or a sharp remark. It was about the deeper culture of entitlement that had built up to that moment, the quiet message that some people didn't belong in certain spaces. Maya refused to let the cynicism drown out her message. Meanwhile, the airline scrambled to contain the fallout. A few days later, her phone rang. Rebecca Hayes, the regional manager, was on the line. "Miss Brooks," Rebecca began, her voice carefully measured. "We've taken significant steps internally to address the incident. I'd like to share some updates and discuss how we can collaborate moving forward." Maya listened quietly as Rebecca outlined the airline's latest actions. Linda Harper had been officially terminated after a thorough review of both the flight incident and prior complaints that had come to light. Additionally, the airline announced plans for a company-wide initiative focused on diversity, inclusion, and professionalism. Every employee, from crew members to senior staff, would undergo mandatory training. "This is progress," Rebecca added cautiously, "but we know there's more to be done. We'd like to invite you to meet with our leadership team in person. We believe your insights can help shape the changes we're implementing." Maya's instinct was to hesitate. She had seen these gestures before, corporate promises designed to quiet public outrage without addressing the real issue. But something in Rebecca's tone felt different. There was a sincerity that gave Maya pause. "I'll consider it," Maya replied after a long moment. "But let me be clear, if I'm part of this, I need to see real action. I'm not interested in symbolic gestures." Rebecca didn't flinch. "Understood. We'll send over an agenda for the meeting. I think you'll see we're serious about making meaningful changes." The next morning, Maya boarded a flight back to the airline's headquarters. A business-class seat, courtesy of the airline, had been reserved for her. The irony wasn't lost on her as she settled into the plush seat. But she wasn't here for perks or compensation. This was about ensuring no one else had to endure what she did. Maya Brooks arrived at the sleek glass-walled building that housed the airline's leadership team. As she stepped inside, Rebecca Hayes and a group of executives greeted her. Their somber expressions told Maya everything she needed to know. They understood the gravity of the moment. They led her to a large conference room where a panel of senior leaders sat waiting, notebooks open, ready to document every word. Rebecca opened the meeting with a formal acknowledgement. "Miss Brooks," Rebecca began, her tone measured but sincere, "on behalf of everyone here, I want to apologize once again for what you experienced. We failed to uphold the standards we claim to value, and for that, we are deeply sorry." Maya nodded but kept her posture firm, her expression unwavering. "Apologies are important," Maya replied, her voice steady, but actions matter more. What happened to me is part of a larger issue. This isn't about one employee, it's about the systems and culture that allowed her behavior to continue unchecked for so long. Her words hung heavy in the air. The executives exchanged quiet glances, the weight of her statement pressing down on the room. Finally, a middle-aged man with sharp features and a polished demeanor cleared his throat. "You're absolutely right," he admitted. "That's why we've initiated a top-to-bottom review of our policies and practices. But we want to hear from you. What steps do you believe we should take to prevent something like this from happening again?" Maya leaned forward, resting her hands on the table. "For starters," she began, "your training programs need to go beyond the basics of customer service. You need to address implicit bias, entitlement, and the power dynamics that surface when staff interact with passengers. And this can't be a one-time thing, it needs to be ongoing." The executives nodded furiously, scribbling down notes. "Second," Maya continued, her gaze firm, "you need a clear accountability system. Staff should know that misconduct, whether it's directed at passengers or colleagues, will have consequences. And those consequences need to be consistent and enforced across the board." She paused for a beat, letting her words linger. "And finally, transparency. If passengers file complaints, they need to see that their voices are heard and that their concerns lead to real, visible changes." Silence followed as the room absorbed her words. Rebecca broke the quiet, her voice calm but resolute. "Everything you've said aligns with what we're working toward," Rebecca said. "We've already begun drafting plans to implement these changes. I'd like to invite you to be part of the process. Your perspective is invaluable, and we believe your involvement can make a real difference." Maya considered the offer carefully. It was a significant commitment, one that had the potential to create lasting change. "I'm willing to be involved," Maya said finally, "but I want full transparency. I'm not here to protect your image. I'm here to make sure these changes stick." Rebecca nodded, her expression unwavering. "You have our full support." The meeting ended with a renewed sense of purpose, but Maya knew the work had only just begun. As she stepped out of the building, her phone buzzed with more messages of support and curiosity about the outcome. Maya typed out a quick update for her followers. "Productive meeting with the airline's leadership today. Promises were made, but the work is just beginning. I'll keep you updated. Accountability doesn't stop here." Within minutes, the post was flooded with thousands of likes and comments. People were watching closely. Maya knew that collective attention was her greatest leverage. The airline had made commitments, and she was determined to hold them to their word. As she walked down the city streets, Maya felt a rare sense of clarity. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, it felt like progress was possible. This wasn't just a personal victory. It was a step toward ensuring respect and accountability for everyone who had ever been made to feel small. Maya was ready to see it through, no matter how long it took. Months passed, and the world hadn't stopped talking about the incident. What began as a fleeting moment of disrespect at 30,000 feet had grown into a movement, one that transcended Maya's personal experience. The airline's promises had become tangible changes, but not without Maya's relentless oversight. She had taken on the role of a consultant, sitting in on meetings, reviewing training materials, and ensuring the company followed through on every commitment. New policies were rolled out, policies unlike anything the airline had implemented before. Diversity and inclusion training became mandatory for all employees, not just during onboarding, but every year. Training modules were revamped to focus on implicit bias, conflict de-escalation, and understanding the nuances of power dynamics in high-pressure environments. Passenger complaints were tracked more rigorously with a transparent reporting system to ensure accountability at every level. The steps weren't perfect, but they were a foundation, a structure Maya knew could be built upon. The public response was overwhelmingly positive. Maya's story inspired other companies to reassess their own policies, sparking similar initiatives across industries. Activists, influencers, and organizations rallied behind her, amplifying her voice. Maya's inbox filled with stories from strangers, stories of injustice, of resilience, of people who had found the courage to stand up because they saw her do the same. She hadn't just sparked change. She had ignited a fire. And Maya Brooks wasn't about to let it burn out. Maya Brooks wasn't one to sit back and admire her accomplishments. She knew that progress wasn't something you simply achieved. It was something you protected. Her days became busier than ever. Between her work as an influencer, her consulting role with the airline, and speaking engagements across the country, Maya's schedule left little time for rest. But the constant flow of messages kept her going. A college student emailed her, explaining how she confronted a professor who had disrespected her, citing Maya's courage as inspiration. A single mother shared how she used Maya's story to teach her children about resilience and self-worth. Each message reminded Maya why she fought so hard. One morning, Maya opened her inbox to find an email from Rebecca Hayes. The airline had completed its first round of comprehensive employee training under the new policies, and the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Rebecca wanted Maya to attend a ceremony recognizing the progress and to speak about her journey. At first, Maya hesitated. She wasn't interested in being paraded as a symbol of the airline's success, but the opportunity to reinforce the importance of accountability was too valuable to pass up. After careful thought, she agreed. The ceremony took place at a large corporate venue, with employees from all levels of the airline in attendance. Maya arrived wearing confidence as effortlessly as armor. The room quieted as she stepped onto the stage, her presence commanding attention. As the applause faded, Maya began to speak. "What happened to me on that flight wasn't just an isolated incident," she said, her voice steady but strong. "It was the result of a culture that tolerated entitlement and disrespect. For too long, people in positions of power have gotten away with behavior that should never have been acceptable. And for too long, people like me have been told to sit quietly and not make waves." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the crowd. "But this isn't about me," Maya continued, scanning the audience. "It's about every passenger who has ever felt invisible, every employee who has been mistreated, every person who has been made to question their worth." Maya's gaze swept the room, locking eyes with several employees who nodded in quiet solidarity. "Today," she said, her voice unwavering, "we're taking steps toward a better future, not just for this airline, but for every industry that serves people." The audience sat in silence, hanging on to every word. "Change isn't easy," Maya continued. "It takes courage, commitment, and accountability. It means listening to the voices of those who have been ignored and making sure their concerns aren't brushed aside." Maya's voice softened, but didn't lose its edge. And most importantly, it requires consistency. What we're celebrating today isn't the end. It's the beginning of a long journey. But I have hope, because I've seen what can happen when people come together with a shared purpose. The room erupted in applause. Afterward, Rebecca approached Maya, gratitude etched across her face. "Thank you, Maya," Rebecca said. "Your involvement has been invaluable. We couldn't have done this without you." Maya shook her head slightly. "You could have," she replied. "The question was whether you would. This isn't about me, it's about the commitment you've made. Don't let that fade." Rebecca nodded solemnly. "We won't, I promise." Later that evening, Maya returned to her hotel room. Exhausted but fulfilled, she sank into the quiet space. She opened her laptop, ready to write a final post about the journey so far. Reflecting on everything that had happened, the confrontation on the plane, the backlash, the long conversations with corporate leaders, Maya felt the weight of it all. But she knew without hesitation that it had been worth every ounce of effort. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she began typing. "Today, I stood on a stage that symbolized progress. But progress isn't a destination. It's a journey. It's about making a choice every day to demand better, to do better. To everyone who has supported me, shared your stories, or stood up in your own way, thank you. This movement isn't about one person or one company. It's about all of us. Together, we're creating a world where respect is non-negotiable. And we're just getting started." Maya hit post and closed the laptop. Notifications poured in almost instantly, but for the first time in months, Maya let them be. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to rest. She had done what she set out to do, not just stand up for herself, but create a ripple effect of accountability and change. The road ahead would be long, but Maya Brooks was ready to keep moving forward.